think for us, the biggest thing for transition in our school is something that we have called Purple Learning. And it's actually about creating independent learners who basically know what they do when they get stuck. They celebrate mistakes. They learn about being resilient and persevering, but also about learning how to improve their learning at all points. And I say that this is the biggest part of transition because that's the biggest thing when children go on to secondary, that the secondary teachers tell us that the children are very resilient, that they understand what to do, how to be independent, and have strategies that they can actually use for effective learning behaviors. And that starts at our school from reception and goes straight through, obviously, in different stages throughout the year groups. And we feel that that's probably the best thing that we do to create independent learners to move on and be lifelong learners, really. In normal days, reception children would start with a phased transition into school. We have lots of days in the summer where we have the children come in, get to meet all the teachers and the TAs in the class, and they meet the teachers. They have an hour session where they come with their parents and have a play and do some independent learning activities with their parents. They then come a week later and have an hour by themselves while their parents are in the hall meeting with me to talk about the school and to talk about sort of expectations and things like that. And then they have a morning as well where they come in for the whole morning without their parents before school starts. And when they start in the September, we have a phased return. So it's about 2 weeks where they only do half days to get them settled, to get them used to routines, and to get them into, you know, being at school. Even though the children have most of them have been in preschool, it's a huge step coming into a primary school, and it's a big difference. So that's what we do with reception. And then all the other year groups, while we're doing this, we have phased, again, we have days where they go up and they meet their new teachers throughout the summer term. And then they usually do a big project as well at the end of summer term, which is work towards a transition event. Year 6, one of the biggest things that we did for year 6, actually, which was the best thing we've ever done, is we've worked really closely with our secondary schools, but there was one school in particular where we set up these days where we got to go in for full days, do observation of the teaching. So it was the year 6 teacher and myself. We did observation of teaching across a range of subjects, so geography, history, maths, and English. And the point was to look at the curriculum, to look at the types of questions they were asking, to see if we could do anything with our curriculum to start teaching children in Key Stage 2 the skills necessary to get them ready for secondary school. And that, for us, was the most insightful way of preparing our children for secondary school. And it was fantastic because we then had a day set aside where we went and met with all the leads of the curriculum. So we met with the history lead, the geography lead, the English lead, and the maths lead specifically, where we talked about how they develop their curriculum, the types of questions they ask, the themes that they look at, and topics such as vocabulary through the subject. And tried to think about how we could tie that into our curriculum, and have been rewriting our curriculum specifically towards that, which has been really useful. So we do lots with the secondary schools, and I think that's the most useful thing, having as many links as you can with your local secondary schools, but branching out to other secondaries as well, and getting as much support as you can about transition and about the curriculum. For us, I think that was one of the best projects we did. Obviously, times are different at the moment, so transition is going to look very different. At the moment, what we are doing is in school, we are thinking about how we're going to do transition for our year 6s into secondary. Unfortunately, we are in a position where our year 6s haven't been able to come back into school. We haven't been able to phase them back into school yet. Which obviously poses a huge concern for parents, especially, and for us, about the fact that children won't be getting a transition like they normally would have. So at the moment, we're talking about the best way of doing this. Obviously, no one's been in this situation, so it's going to be all brand new. But what we're doing is the last 3 weeks of term, we're doing a transition project with the year 6s online. At the moment, they're currently having 3 hours of Zoom lessons every single day with the year 6 teacher. And as part of that, it's all about transition work. For reception, we're going to try something quite different. We are in a position where we have preschool on site, and because they're a private preschool, they have not been able to secure new pupils for September. So we're talking with them at the moment for thinking about maybe having the first 3 weeks of the school year, if it's normal, where the children perhaps stay in preschool. We use preschool staff, and we have a sort of a transition of 3 weeks where we start getting the children ready for school, because we feel them coming straight into reception class is going to be a huge change for them. And so we're thinking about the prospect of trying something different where we start them in preschool and slowly phase them back into the school. I have no idea what it's going to look like, to be honest with you. We're going to try it, see how it works. The other year groups are all going to be doing Zoom sessions with their new teachers over the next couple of weeks. A lot of it's going to be Zoom where we can. And then thinking as well, again, in September about possibly doing a couple of days where they go back to their previous year, so the year that they're in now, do some work, final work with that teacher to say goodbye, and then come back into school, if that makes sense. So that's currently what we have at the moment. However, the biggest thing I would say is when children do get phased back into school in September, or whenever school looks or starts looking normal again, I think the biggest thing that we are going to have to focus on is children's well-being. That's going to be a huge thing. We're really lucky as a school because we have Jackie, who is our full-time homeschool link worker. We are really lucky in the fact that we have a full-time homeschool link worker. She's waving to you now. And she's fantastic, because obviously we know that without children being focused and their well-being first and foremost, that they will never access learning in the class. So having Jackie is a huge help, because obviously she takes children, supports them with their well-being to ensure that they are ready to come back in the class. And I think she's going to have, she already has a huge workload, but in September it's going to, I think, triple, Jackie. But that's going to be the biggest focus when we come back, is easing anxieties, getting children ready and confident to be back in the classroom, and confident that they can deal with what comes at them. So yeah, that's where we are.
That is absolutely brilliant, Flora. Thank you so much. I forgot to say, what we're going to do is speaker. So if you have questions for Flora, pop them into the chat. And when we've listened to all three speakers, I'll then field the questions to them to answer, because some of the questions might get answered by the other speakers. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Maria, who's going to talk about transition at secondary. Thank you, Flora. Over to you, Maria.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about my transition philosophy as a general, then I'm going to look at this side of the year, and then at September as well. I think the whole society is very much in transition, so you can think of this transition to secondary school as a transition within the transition. And we are transitioning to the unknown because we are still unsure what it's going to be like in September. So it is really important to go back to our values, to go back what will support our children. What I'm going to say is the first thing and foremost thing, do not assume anything. We don't know who the vulnerable children will be. We don't know who the vulnerable families are anymore, because we all have experienced different things. We are all individual. We would have digested everything through our own experiences and our own emotions. So it is really important not to assume anything, but to use any software available. You have got My Concern, you have got CPOMs. They're all available at the moment for free to support schools with that transition. So any puzzles, it's like getting the puzzle together, little bits, any informal conversations, any formal, will give you a picture of who might be more vulnerable than usual. So don't assume that the pupils who have not been vulnerable will continue not being vulnerable. Things have changed. So that's the first thing. The second one is notice. You know, noticing is such a strong pastoral skill. A lot of things are not being said. So noticing and paying attention and encouraging every single member of the community to do the same is very important.
Hi, Mom.
Hello?
Hi, how are you doing?
Hello? Right, am I still here? Okay, I'll continue. So in terms of this year, this side of the year, it is so important to do whatever your school needs to do. We have had a long discussion on UK Pastoral Chat, and people produced loads of booklets, virtual visits, whatever works for your community. But again, what I would say, don't rush into things. I think there is a bit of a sense of panic. Oh, they are doing this, we need to do this too. Oh, they are doing this. I think it's the time to slow down, look back at your community and say, will this work for us? Is it worth our staff being overwhelmed, or will that have the maximum impact, or will it not have as much impact? So it is really important just to stand back out of that, you know, anxiety and Russian bubble and say, right, okay, what works for our community? Where do we need to go? What works for our kids? Because at the end of the day, you know, that's what we're working for. We're not working to tick boxes and do all the wonderful things. We are working to ensure that it has got the most impact on our children. Going back to September, I have, well, going forward or backwards, I've got no idea where we're going, but we are transitioning to the unknown. I think, again, it's a transition is a big word. We need to break that down, because I can see it as being a lot of different transitions throughout the year. It will take us a long time to get back to what we once thought was the norm or normal. I think we need to look at what normal is actually, you know, with everything that's changing. So I think, you know, I completely agree. Well-being must be at the forefront of everything that we do in September. I have done quite a lot of research on well-being, you know, and if you look at the well-being, you know, if you imagine a seesaw, that's your well-being. On one side you will have the challenges, on one side you have resources. If the challenges outweigh resources, then your well-being suffers. So if you have got that visual and you explain to people that they have got to build resources, and that's the resource building should continue in September. There are 5 areas of well-being. You have got the physical, the emotional, the social, the transpersonal. So it is really important to pinpoint which ones are suffering right now, and it will be the social and the emotional well-being. So these are the 2 areas that need to be addressed straight away, because the way that we socialize, it has been very different. And we regard now humans as a danger because they are spreading the virus. So how would it affect people's with sensory difficulties? How is it going to affect others? So how can we move back to a person being a friend rather than an enemy who potentially infect us with something? So there are loads of things to consider, but I would say social well-being and emotional well-being are the 2 priorities. In terms of emotions, I have done quite a lot of research, and I can signpost you to various books, but pupils cannot express their emotions sometimes. They don't have that emotional vocabulary to say what they feel. And, you know, if you talk about emotions, it's not black or white. You know, there was a lot of research done on the basic emotions, but actually most people experience something which is a mix of emotions at the same time. And one of the activities that I would recommend doing is to say, okay, so let's look at the cakes. What do you think a cake? And, you know, you might have a lemon drizzle, you might have a Victoria sponge, a chocolate cake, but that's what emotions are like. This is the type of activity which will encourage empathy. We all think of cakes in different ways. We might feel differently. We might express our emotions differently. So again, building all the values of unity, empathy, understanding our emotions. There are a lot of programs which say that they measure well-being, and personally, you know, I would be very careful at subscribing to any expensive things that will say, we will measure your school's well-being. Okay, most of the time they would say that we measure well-being and mental health. Well, mental health is part of the well-being. So straight away, I'm asking the question, how much do you actually know about well-being? You put in mental health and well-being on the same par. Mental health goes under the well-being. Again, what are you measuring? What type of questionnaires are you asking? The best way to do it, I think, if you decide what you need to measure, if you need to measure an emotional well-being, ask the questions that you want to ask, that you want to hear, which are relevant for your community to get that picture. So, you know, and also my last point is, when we're talking about pastoral care, we're talking about proactive and reactive pastoral care. And I can understand that there will be probably a surge in disclosures because we don't know what's been happening in the families. So I'm sure DSLs will be absolutely run down with all the things that they have got to do. However, the proactive pastoral care needs to be put in place straight away as well, because we still need to continue planning into the future and establishing the values and establishing the new boundaries and whatever it is. So make sure whatever you do that your structure is responsive, and make sure that you have got someone responsible for proactive pastoral care, because if we are being reactive and just trying to deal with everything that's been thrown at us, you know, we're not doing the best for our children. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Whistle stop tour there. And what I will do is collate a load of links and a load of recommendations from the speakers at the end to share with you all as well. So we've heard from Flora around primary transition. We've heard from Maria around secondary transition. And we've now got Amjad, who I used to work with, who was my assistant head teacher for inclusion, who's going to talk through what he does re-send transition. And Amjad, what I said at the beginning was perhaps a bit about what you normally do and a bit about how you are adjusting what you do based on the current climate. Lovely to see you. Over to you, Amjad.
Okay, hi everyone. Sorry, I'm last minute. So secondary transition is about ensuring that the inclusion lead and whoever normally has the role of transition lead work together really effectively. So in terms of inclusion, it's really important that there's clear information that's transferred over from the primary schools in regards to who is on the SEN register, who is pupil premium, who is vulnerable, and what information can be translated and then adapted and placed into the secondary setting. In sort of smaller number of feeder schools to secondary school inputs, it's essential to ensure that you know who the SENCOs are, maybe even the year 6 teachers, the head teachers, etc. But I mean, when Hannah was there, I think we had 26 feeder schools. We're up to 48 now, so it's really difficult to know each of those names in particular. But it's important to be able to transfer information across and let the primary school colleagues know exactly what you offer and how you offer it, because I think whispers on the grapevine are fantastic if that is actually what you do. If it isn't what you do, then it's really difficult for parents sending their families up to you and saying, well, don't you do this, don't you do this, don't you do this, and sort of having those conversations post entry is a lot more difficult. So simply put, what we would do is we would mirror the transition program that the secondary school would have in general. I would then double that up. So where the transition lead would speak to the year 6 teachers or the overall year 6 phase leader, I would speak to the SENCO and the year 6 teacher. We send over effectively, in a kind of sneaky way, our own pupil profile for the primary colleagues to fill in. And to be honest, I'm not precious about that. If they just send their own pupil profile version for their child, then we just take that information from there. I then follow that up with what we would have done was a face-to-face meeting with schools that had a certain amount of SEN students, but now it's a phone call or a Zoom meeting to everyone to just ask further questions. So for example, so tell me a bit more about this diagnosis. Tell me a bit more about which agencies are involved. What does the teaching assistant support look like for you? And what would that look like for us? And then just digging a bit deeper into those kind of things. When was the last EP assessment? Has an EHCP been applied for? If it was rejected, why was it rejected? All of those kind of conversations. But really showing trust and real professionalism in terms of what the primary school colleagues share with us. That's what we take. We don't say, well, can you prove it? Or can you tell us how you've done that? And all of those kind of things. What's also important to note is every primary and secondary, of course, is quite unique. So where in terms of somebody could be presenting as a really challenging student within that context, placed within another context might not be the most challenging, for example. So understanding what that looks like in another setting is really important. And also when dealing with, say, 45 different SENCOs or 45 different year 6 teachers, everyone will be worried about their children. Everyone will say, I'm really concerned about the transition. I'm really worried about the move from primary to secondary. Absolutely. And as are we. So it's just ensuring that that communication is clear, that information transfer is clear. And the most important thing for me, aside from the communication with the parents and the teachers, is the external agency overlap. So if they are involved with communication interaction team, if they are involved with speech and language team, if they are involved with the physical disability team, already knowing who those students are in advance to keep that overlap instant, rather than there being a delay in, well, I didn't know, or I wasn't sure, or we didn't know who these things were. So keeping that information overlap is absolutely vital. And then the kind of closing off of all of that would then be sharing that information with staff. So on inset day, having a transition document, PowerPoint, whatever you want to call it, where you say, here are our vulnerable students, here are our EHCP students, here are our students that we need to keep an eye on, and making sure that that information overlap goes to the staff as well. Additional things that we would do for EHCP students in particular is I personally would meet all of their parents or carers. I would give them a call. I would also visit them in their setting. We can't do that now. So what we're doing now is that we've organized a personal phone call to the student for every single student that's joining us. So every single student will receive a phone call from either an allocated key worker or a member of staff. We've also created a virtual tour of our school where students can see what each room looks like. They could also look at what our dining hall looks like, look at our outdoor equipment, etc. And we've also created a virtual recording of, hi, I'm Mr. Ali, I work here, my office is here. So they get an overview of who's who and what's what. Learning from experience, so being a startup school, there were many things that we couldn't do initially, but now as we've grown with staff and numbers, we've also pre-allocated key workers, pre-allocated parent meetings, and just keeping that information overlap. But being clear that if a teacher says to me that their student is under progress or below expected, just that's it. That's what the teacher has said, and that's what they feel. They know them best, and that's what we'll go with. But also transferring the confirmation and the communication with, well, actually, they have a TA with them all the time. That's a lot easier to say if there's one TA in a year 6 class, for example. When you then go to year 7, you might have 5 different subjects and 5 different teachers in 5 different classrooms in one day. So it's making sure that communication is bridged through. But essentially, I would say information from the primary school, communication to the parents and carers, communication to the children as well. Because often what's often missed is people will go to school, speak to the SENCO, speak to the year 6 student, year 6 teachers, but actually not speak to the students. So just have a conversation with the students. Hi, Mr. Ali, when you see me around school, make sure you say hello. You could come and see me. You get a little bit of extra special treatment because I've come to see you in particular, and just making them feel good. And that's what we're trying to do with our phone calls. But yeah, and then just transferring that information over. Being a Google school, it's a lot easier for us because we just send a link, and that's constantly updated rather than here's another version and here's another version and here's another version. So yeah, sorry if that wasn't very coherent. I just rambled through what kind of things that we do.
And, it's great. You got so much to share. I can hear the kids in the background. Are you going to shoot off? Or
yes, that's okay. Yeah, I've got to.
If there's questions for you, I'll collate them. I'll get you to answer them or email that again. In fact, I really appreciate you.
If anyone's interested, they could check out our website. We put all of our links and documents on there, so they could have a look at the video clips and the head teacher's welcome and all those things there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for squeezing us in. I'll talk to you soon. Cheers, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah, well, bye-bye.
They had a second baby just before lockdown, so he's juggling quite a lot. He's been at school today as well, so bless him. Okay, our final speaker is Emma, who's going to focus more on the kind of the supporting the staff transition, and then we'll open it out and go to questions. So thank you, Emma, for waiting patiently. It's now your time to talk.
Okay, that's brilliant. I'm similarly to Maria, I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour of about 10 years of research. And actually, I've never met Maria before, so I promise we haven't collaborated, but there are some surprising overlaps between what I'm going to say and what she said. So first of all, I was thinking about this whole idea of transition. And obviously, in normal times, we talk about transition from school to school or transition from nursery to reception. We are in a complete state of transition, a complete state of flux at the moment. And from where I'm sitting, there is no going back. There is no going back to how we ordinarily did things. I am not a fan of the hippie, this is a great opportunity, this is brilliant, because people are suffering terribly. But actually, alongside the challenges, we have a massive opportunity here to reevaluate what it means to be an educator, what it means to be a school, what it means to work with young people. And we ignore that opportunity at our peril. And alongside that, we've had the murder of George Floyd. You know, there's a whole wave of political correctness coming through, people trying to be really good. We need to make sure we ride that wave and it doesn't become a tokenistic thing, and we actually really move with that move towards a greater diversity and people wanting to educate and inform themselves and make that something that's sustainable. So first of all, I liked Hannah's question about how do you normally do things and how do you do things now? So as I've mentioned, I've been researching wellbeing for a long time, and what's striking, I've done a few of these presentations, and actually what's striking is how many of the same principles are still the same. They're exactly the same. So one of them is comes from a deputy head teacher who I interviewed for my doctorate, and she talks about how well-being is not about pampering teachers or playing to their every whim. You know, well-being isn't about I've got too much, or isn't about not wanting to work hard, because every student has one bite of the cherry, and that phrase "one bite of the cherry" has stayed with me ever since, and that is so crucial because, of course, despite all of the headlines, and I will talk a bit more about that later, you know, one of the reasons teachers have been feeling so exhausted, one of the many reasons, is because we are desperately anxious about those students who we haven't been able to reach. And in some of the schools where I've had contact and where I work, that's been up to 30% of students who've disappeared off the radar. We are desperately anxious. We don't know what to expect when those students come back to school, and we haven't been able to look into the whites of their eyes and see how they are. We haven't been able to observe their mannerisms. We haven't been able to smell them, to check they've had a wash. You know, we haven't been able to give them a cereal bar under the desk just because they're looking a bit hungry. And that's the cause of huge anxiety. So one bite of the cherry, the first principle. Second principle comes from Helena Marsh, head teacher, which is my okay isn't necessarily your okay. So in ordinary times, it might really wind me up, and it does, if I walk past you in a corridor and say good morning and you ignore me. There might be all sorts of reasons for you to do that, but it would really wind me up. Whereas I've got colleagues who would be really wound up if an assembly went over by 10 minutes because they like to have everything just so and every element of every lesson planned. And they're just different approaches, and that could ruin someone's entire week. So my okay isn't the same as your okay. And how acute is that now? You know, let's look at the variety of situations that people find themselves in, from people who've been in lockdown completely alone, to those people who have children running around, which I do, homeschooling, to people with vulnerable elderly relatives, to many, many people, including school leaders, who are worried about their own health and don't necessarily want to broadcast that to the world. So you know, we need to be acutely aware of the diversity of experience that we're coming up against here. So my okay isn't necessarily your okay. And actually, coincidentally, just before I came on, this popped up on my Twitter feed, and it's one of my favorites. It comes from Stephen Covey. It's the idea of human beings first and teachers second, and that humane, I was going to say humane leadership, but being a humane colleague, leadership in all directions. It's not just about everything falling on the head teacher. So in brief, what kind of challenges do we, so this is how I do everything. I do challenges, then I do ways forward. So what kind of challenges are we facing as a profession at the moment? Well, there is the hideous uncertainty, and I've talked about not knowing what's happening with our students. Obviously, we're having curveballs thrown at us left, right and centre. You know, listening to Women's Hour this morning, this talk of summer schools. Nobody knows, nobody knew when schools were going to close, how they were going to close. Head teachers effectively had, what, 4 days to go from being an ordinary school to a school for key worker children, and people were just left to jump and do it in their own way. So this again means that there's been a hugely diverse array of approaches to this, because people have effectively felt sink or swim as if they're on there and they've just had to do it. So that collaboration, which would normally empower us, hasn't been there. Second challenge, people are completely knackered. You know, and I am particularly worried about head teachers at the moment. Worried, I don't know whether that's the right word, but concerned for, aware of, conscious of, because they haven't stopped. and many school leaders, and this applies to many teachers, they have not stopped. From the 17th of March, when the whole new world order was announced, to now, they've worked through holidays, through weekends, and now there's the talk of the summer. And when people are exhausted, if you think about the book The Chimp Paradox, their chimps come out. You know, people are raw, people are sensitive. So coming back to that whole idea of perceptions of teachers and headlines, we've got these, and I won't even quote them, but these incredibly provocative headlines which have been recurring through this period, which normally people I know would just brush off or ignore. But actually, I've known people who are really robust, really resilient, become incredibly upset because actually we're doing our bloody best here and we do care. And of course we're not lazy. And how dare you, you know, tell us, you know, and this whole idea that Anne Ross of the TES talks about is everyone has an opinion about schools and education. It's like everyone, from the guy in the pub to people at number 10 who have never experienced a state education. And it's so frustrating. And alongside that, I've had so many head teachers who are really stressed about perceptions of parents, because again, there's that diversity of experience, diversity of expectation. And a teacher contacted me recently and said, I've been accused today of not setting enough work, setting too much work, setting work that's too easy, and setting work that's too hard. I literally cannot win. So all of these different pressures. So what's the way forward? Well, this is not easy, and I've tried not to pick up on the main themes. I've tried to pick up on some of the things that really made me think. So this period, we've said already, we cannot afford to go back to how things were before. This is about what a very optimistic colleague of mine talks about, describes as the art of the possible. This is our one opportunity to question what is normal, as Maria said. You know, what is normal? Well, nothing is normal, and nothing is ever going to be normal again, is it? And actually that could be a really good thing. And that whole idea of moral imperative and one bite of the cherry, and what does it mean to be a teacher, really actually having a chance, if not the time or the space or the energy, to really question those things. So, I mean, what Maria said about slowing down and noticing, you know, just slow down and notice your colleagues, assume nothing. You know, as my husband says, assumption is the mother of all mess ups, except he doesn't use the word mess. You know, assume nothing more than ever. You know, in ordinary times, we walk into a classroom, we cannot assume that a top set year 11 in an inner city school will know what a daffodil is. We found that out the hard way. You know, we cannot assume anything in terms of what our colleagues have experienced. So we need to slow down, we need to notice. Most of our colleagues are actually, I know I am, I would pay to get into a classroom now. And I know I change my tune regularly, but I would fall at someone's feet and say, let me come into school. Teachers in general are desperate to get back to school, but some just can't. So I know my own children, there's no prospect of anything happening with their school in their year 5 and year 8. They're not going to go back before September. It's just not going to happen. So if someone did say to me, we need you at school on Tuesday to Friday, I wouldn't be able to do it. But we need to be very careful, because actually child-free colleagues without children, we need to be very careful not to exploit, not to abuse their goodwill, because I think there have been a few people who've contacted me saying, well, our school's being really sympathetic to everyone with children. They don't have to go in, and I don't mind, but that means that I'm the one who's expected to do everything. So I just think we need to keep that as at the forefront of our minds. Communication, transparency. You know, I mean, another head teacher, a friend of mine, said, everyone expects me to know the answers all of the time, but the answer to almost all questions throughout this 3-month period has been, I don't know. And actually being able to say to our colleagues, I don't know, requires a show of vulnerability. And I know Hannah's written about this, but which actually is very hard for a lot of school leaders. So that transparency, that openness of communication, say we're doing our best, but we don't know. You know, we don't have the space. We're doing our best. Please feed back to us, but please don't attack us on Facebook without talking to us first. And actually, that's a big thing. And it just comes back to one of my other main mantras. I know I've been talking for more than 5 minutes. Sorry, Hannah. Is that mantra of good enough? You know, we are teachers are naturally control freaks. We like control. That's why we're so bad in labour. There's a pattern there that midwives find. Teachers like to be in control. At the moment, our circle of influence, the inner circle from the Covey circles, is so tiny that that's making us very, very anxious. But it's that whole idea of, and we're also perfectionists. We like everything to be just so. I work with Teach First at the moment, and it's rife, this perfectionism. And actually we need to accept that we are doing our best, that what we are doing is good enough, is more than good enough. You know, I'm not working full time in a classroom anymore, and my hat's off. I've got so much respect to those who are. So what you're doing is good enough, and it will continue to be good enough as long as you keep collaborating and building on those strengths of working together. Thank you. That was more than 5 minutes.
Thank you, Emma. That's fine. Thank you very much for that. Four brilliant messages. I'm now going to go to some of the questions and just pitch them at you. But if you want to chip in, please do so. So, Flora, a question for you. Could you talk a little bit more about your plans for any Year Sixes who haven't yet or aren't able to return, and how you will facilitate their transition, please?
So obviously it's quite new. We are thinking through plans at the moment. But what we know it will involve is a lot of our purple learning stuff that we do in school. So it's very much about getting children to evaluate and reflect on their learning, which we build into the learning that they do. So the Year 6 teacher, he will do lots of lessons where that's what he's asking the children to do, to evaluate, to think through what techniques, what strategies they used to get to their answers. Is very much about justifying and explaining. But teaching them what to do when they get stuck is the key thing, so that when they have challenges in secondary school, they know what to do or how to get the answers that they need without going to the teacher as the first step. One of the other things is we are going to try and do, because we obviously know that Year 6 haven't had any end. I saw one of the questions below. We are going to try and get the Year 6s together at some time before the end of the school year in some way, in 2 groups of bubbles of 15. I don't know how we'll do it, where we can have some sort of send off for them, because we know that, you know, that's what parents are quite concerned about, is getting them all back together.
Yeah, thank you. And not just the Year 6s, the Year 11s and the Year 13s. Like, I really feel for all those endpoints of the key stages where they haven't had that closure. My next door neighbour's a Year 13 lad, and he started uni in September, and he's like, it's just such a, not having closure. I think that's really important, to try and do something in the autumn term to revisit and celebrate and say goodbye, no matter what juncture it's at. So thank you for talking to that. Amjad's shot off, but Bryony's very kindly said she'll answer some questions. So there's a question on here about specific approaches for children with SEND. Bryony, are you still here? Have you gone?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, hi, lovely. Is there anything you've not heard that you'd like to just share, top tips for supporting children with extra needs, please?
Yeah, I've been encouraging the schools that I'm working with to not wait until September and to really start thinking about the tiny steps of progress that they might have to be making with the kids. For some of the children, we've been talking about really, really small steps, like walking past the school gates and you know, just waving at school staff. We've been talking about doing things like practicing saying goodbye and walking away from your parents, because the teachers can't approach the adults to take their children from the parents. So we've really been thinking about carefully considering the very small skills and each step of those very small skills, so that you can have a hierarchy of small steps of progress.
So important, Bryony. And
yeah,
I'm thinking a lot about the sensory experience. So I went to a hospital for an appointment recently, and I got completely overwhelmed by the noise. Because I spent 12 weeks at home in the quiet, and there were like 10 people speaking, and I literally got a little panic attack, but it really, really triggered me. And I haven't got any additional needs. Like, I'm conscious that children who already have those kind of needs, like, what can we do to support the sensory experience and transition?
And one of the things, another thing I've encouraged one of the schools to do is to not expect the children to come in necessarily the first day, but to get them to walk around the one-way system and then go home, so that you're not having so many new experiences all at once. And then the next day they might walk around the one-way system and then go and sit on the field with an adult and have a juice, and then go home. so that you're just adding one small thing in every day, so that the whole experience doesn't become this suddenly very overwhelming experience. We've talked also about things like making sure that the kids have got some downtime at regular points during the day, and some contact with a trusted member of staff, and please let them say who their trusted member of staff is rather than necessarily imposing one on them. Yeah, that's that sort of thing. It's making sure that if possible there is a space that they can go and wrap themselves in a blanket, or they can sit under a table, or whatever it is they want to do. And yeah, don't assume that the secondary school kids don't want to sit under a table or wrap themselves in their blanket. They often do. Yeah, does that help, Anna?
Yeah, that's really helpful, Bronnie. Thank you so much for chipping in there.
That's all right.
And a question for you, Maria. So one of the questions on here is about schemes of work. And I'm like, we know we normally have a transition kind of scheme, but we also now have a recovery curriculum as well. Any thoughts on how those two might be paralleled or blended or integrated? You need to unmute yourself, lovely.
It's okay. Okay, can you hear me? Brilliant. Okay. So I think, you know, there has been a lot of work done in terms of the curriculum to enable pupils acquire the different skills. And now we're talking about recovery curriculum as well. I think you've got to distinguish between the pastoral and academic. And in terms of the pastoral curriculum, I would suggest, look, what does your community need? You know, what will work better with your community? And look at the well-being. You know, I have got so many resources. I would, you know, if you find them useful, please, you know, I'm happy to share them. But it is talking about emotions, it is talking about well-being, it is talking about social well-being as well, and mental well-being. So I think that will be your pastoral curriculum, and it can't be just a lesson. It has got to be embedded throughout the year, whatever space you have got, whether it's a timetabled lesson, whether it's everything else, and that will underpin the academic curriculum as well. So, you know, I would envisage academic curriculum will be, let's regroup, let's plan for the future, you know, but it has got to be, you know, there is a huge divide between the academic and pastoral, and we need, this is a great opportunity for us to break that cycle and to marry up the academic and the pastoral together. And it's a great time for schools to create something of their own based on all the other things that's available there, but which will be specific for the curriculum that their pupils and their staff need. And their staff, you know, got to be comfortable to deliver. There is so much training for staff, again, flying around, bereavement, ACEs, you know, everything. And it's great stuff, but it can be so overwhelming. We have got to think about our staff as well, and not to overwhelm them with the amount of information that's available there.
Thank you so much, Maria. That's brilliant. And I want to come to you, Emma, because I'm seeing lots flying around social media about the recovery curriculum for children. I'm not seeing anything around a recovery curriculum for adults. And if we're thinking about the recovery that our adults need, and particularly those adults who have been most exposed, like our SENCOs, our safeguarding leads, like the people who have taken the brunt of it emotionally, what might a recovery curriculum look like for staff, do you think?
Oh goodness, that's a huge question. I mean, yeah, just to acknowledge, I mean, my best friend's a Senko, and it's been absolutely horrendous. It's been, you know, she's Senko with 2 young children, so she's been starting work at 7 and working through till 3 a.m. to keep on top of the workload. A recovery curriculum for staff, goodness me. Well, I saw the question about staff in September. I think the first thing to say on staff wellbeing is people will remember how they were treated during this period. So I think it's less about planning for, well, it is about planning for September, but it's also about thinking about what we're doing now. And often well-being comes back to the small things. And one of the small things, the most powerful thing that school leaders have done to support staff through this period is call home. Just call them. Give them a ring. So senior leaders have divided staff up between them. Patrick O'Connor does this, and they give their colleagues a call once every 2 to 3 weeks just to check in. And I put something on Twitter about this, and I got all sorts of indignant responses saying, well, I haven't had a phone call. I would have loved a phone call. Why haven't I had a phone call? So I think it really is the really small things. I mean, the bottom line, yeah, these are adult. We're going to need something like, so the Prue where I work, they do effectively a supervision at the end of each day. So they actually sit down and they talk about the challenges they've faced, and they talk about their blessings and the things that have gone well and what they've learned from them. So there needs to be something much more formal like that, where people have a chance to talk and to share. I think you know, what has previously been quite tokenistic in my latest research, I think only 40% of schools had a well-being group actually established in the school. That group is going to be absolutely crucial, so people actually feel they have a safe person to go to talk to, who will empathize and understand their context. And that group needs to include not just teachers, but teaching assistants, office staff, cleaning staff. I mean, let's think about the pressure of the cleaning staff actually for a second. How important are they? So those well-being groups, which are not tokenistic and bolt-on, but are integral to the running of the school, are going to be absolutely key. The one thing that's not going to help is throwing compulsory yoga sessions at staff, or chocolate tasting on a Friday, or all of those tokenistic things which actually used to really annoy most people anyway. So someone in the question said, what are you doing for well-being? Well, actually, you might not need to do anything extra beyond actually communicating openly, honestly, giving people a safe place to talk, a safe place to be heard, offering school counselling or signposting to counselling within the local authority.
Thank you, and that segues into, I want to go back to your reference earlier on to Black Lives Matters, because I think there's a real piece for us to all be doing with our colleagues and our communities from diverse backgrounds. So I know of black head teachers and black teachers in Oxfordshire where not a single person from their school or their MAT or their governing body has checked in with them to ask them if they're okay. And if we think about the kind of the grief, the bereavement, the loss, the trauma that we've experienced because of COVID, and then you add into it Black Lives Matters, we really need to consider how psychologically unsafe some of our colleagues are feeling. So when we're thinking about vulnerability, we need to be thinking about race as part of that vulnerability at the moment. And we need to have a strategy for what we're doing to support everybody who's gone through COVID, but then it's going to be amplified and heightened emotionally for particular groups. And there's been a lot of people resistant to get involved because they don't know how to. And there's been a series of events in the last week, and I'll pop some of them into the next newsletter. But there's been quite a lot of guidance from BAME-Ed. So if you're not following BAME-Ed, BAME-Ed is a grassroots organisation for Black, Asian and minority ethnicity teachers, and they've put out a lot of publication, risk assessments and guidance for how to support people of colour in particular at the moment. So please just bear that in mind when you're thinking about wellbeing and mental health and anxiety. There are particular groups who've got more trauma.
Sorry, Hannah, it's worth considering actually doing a separate risk assessment for your BAME colleagues, because let's not forget that actually our Black and ethnic minority colleagues were more disproportionately affected by the virus already before all this.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for bringing that up. And I just wanted to come back to you, Flora. So you talked about having Jackie as a resource. It's brilliant that you've got a full-time human resource in your school, but we also know that the lockdown has really impacted the finances of a lot of schools. And I think I'm quite worried that although people know that mental health and wellbeing is a priority, with sort of like financial constraints, is it the first thing that's going to be cut? Like how are you managing it from a budget and resource point of view?
I mean, that's not even, I think for us, a question in our school. The fact that, you know, we know that well-being sits centrally at the heart of everything that we do for staff and children. And, you know, without Jackie, we couldn't do what we do. So I think for us, that's not where we would cut anything from. It would be, we would have to look at our resources, not staffing resources, but, you know, curriculum resources, things that we purchase, tangible items, and look at our spending in that way and cut from there before we do staff or definitely anything around well-being.
Brilliant. And I hope that's the message that's out in the system. It just really worries me. I feel like that people are clawing back money left, right and centre. I'm hearing lots of stories about CPD budgets being completely ransacked, and there's no money for CPD this year. There's no money for coaching this year. And I really hope that all of your DSLs have got supervision, because that's a basic requirement and entitlement in schools as well. I want to come back to you, Maria. So there's a question about, like, how do we manage the parental expectations? Because when we have anxious parents, we have anxious children. How do we do that communication and partnership piece with the parents who are obviously quite nervous as well?
again, I think it goes back to knowing your families, and hopefully the information that has been gathered throughout this time of the lockdown would help us to establish where the families are at. So very much a personalized, approach to families, and actually, establishing a well-being focus group with parents, making sure that the parents are heard, checking in with families, like Amjad said, phone calls, making phone calls, phoning parents, talking. I think, it has got to be a number of things rather than one particular thing. So just to summarize, I know I have given quite a few ideas, but I haven't structured them properly. So first of all, using the knowledge that has been obtained throughout this time to know where the families are at, emailing, phoning families to double check where they're at the start of September, having maybe a questionnaire for families. What do they need from us as a school, once the curriculum, asking for their input in the pastoral curriculum. If they wanted to deliver something, again, inviting them in, because this relationship will be more, more necessary than usual, because we are trying to cater for the unknown, and only families really at the moment know where their children are, and then you've got the other side, as some of the children might have witnessed domestic violence. So how do we manage these conversations? How do we, as you said, how do we support our DSLs in dealing with all the safeguarding issues that might emerge when we get back in September? So there is no, right or wrong answer. Again, it's looking at what your situation is within your community, and then using different intervention strategies, proactive pastoral care to plan for the future and to address the concerns that we might gather.
Thank you. And yeah, whilst you're talking then, I'm just thinking really about creating those safe spaces for each stakeholder group. So basically people just want to be seen and heard and have that sense of belonging, and just creating safe spaces where people can talk and listen. So for the last 12 weeks, I've been running peer support circles, and for an hour each night, I have 6 women who just come and talk. And it's just that safe space that I hold where they offload. And I think and that's free. All it is time and energy. So if you've got staff who could host and facilitate sort of circles for your vulnerable children, for your vulnerable staff, but then think about your vulnerable parents as well. It's free. All it is time as a resource. But it's really powerful just creating that safe space to be seen and to be heard. And yeah, I just think it's really, really powerful. I think I've got through all of the questions. Are there any questions that have emerged that you just want to pop your hand up and say? We've got 5 minutes left. Emma, do you want to say something? Go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say just one thing about what Maria just said about phoning home. I know a lot of teachers have spent an awful lot of time phoning home and building those relationships at home, which actually might end up being better than they were before lockdown. And I know in particular, a lot of schools have actually been using their less experienced staff, their newer teachers, their form tutors to do that. So making there's a real rich bank of knowledge that can be built upon. And I just wanted to say on newer teachers, because I work with them, their levels of resilience in the main, based on my sample, have been extraordinary. So do lean on those teachers, because they're quite nervous about coming into the profession, but actually the depth of knowledge that they've obtained and the depth of moral imperative they have now, the profession, I think they can be relied upon quite a lot and leaned on quite a lot. And this is what I'm saying to them: your more experienced colleagues are really going to need your energy and your optimism and your resilience at the moment.
Well, I've said, during having run a PGC this year, I've said to my trainees, if you can survive training to teach in COVID, you're going to be the most resilient teachers in the country. Honestly, what a year to train to teach. And just read that check-in piece. Two pieces of wisdom I've heard recently. When you say, "Are you okay?" don't accept the first answer. Are you really okay? Because okay is such a neutral response. What does okay really mean? And Maria talked about emotional literacy. We all know that the children and the staff we really need to hear from perhaps haven't got the words to articulate it. So doing that kind of deep dive into what does okay look like and feel like today. And the technique I used to use, but I've heard about it being used with staff recently. So I used to have quite a lot of children who were very vulnerable, boys on suicide watch, and I'd do a check-in with them every morning, and we just used the scale of 1 to 10. So what's your number today? And if it was a 5 or a 6, we were okay. If it was a 3, I should be worried. And just using that kind of number rather than words helps those children who hasn't got their language. However, I've heard a head teacher's been using this for the whole of lockdown. And every time she has a meeting, they start the meeting by checking in with a number. So imagine how powerful is it if at the start of every meeting, what is your number today? And everyone goes around the circle. I'm a 3, I'm a 4, I'm an 8. And the person chairing the meeting does it as well. So she's having a bad day, because we all have bad days. And she says, I'm feeling like a 4 today. People might just go a little bit easier on her when she introduces an idea they don't want to hear. Or if everyone's a 7 that day, she can be a little bit more energetic in the meeting. I just thought that was such a powerful and such a simple thing to do.
Hannah, can I add something there?
Every meeting with numbers rather than words. Yes, Barney, just you then.
Yeah, just wanted to add, it's been really interesting listening about the recovery curriculum and the teachers' emotional literacy. And I think what I want to add is that you're right, we need to encourage the teachers to voice how they're feeling, because and to talk about feelings in front of the kids, because we need the teachers, all the teachers, not just the pastoral support. So we need all the teachers to be modelling how to talk about emotions and the emotional vocabulary. So when we're saying that the academic curriculum and the pastoral curriculum are 2 different things, for me, they need to really knit together. We need the teachers to be talking about emotions. We need the English teachers to be talking about the emotions of the characters. We need the art teachers to be talking about emotions. We need the drama teachers to be doing it. We need the PE teachers. We need everybody to be talking about it, so that the kids know that talking about emotions is okay.
Absolutely, thank you. And that modelling of vulnerability, absolutely, that we're all human beings, we all meet each other at the same level. Thank you for adding that in.
That's all right. The other thing I wanted to add, and then I must go because my dog is staring me out because he thinks it's time for a walk. The other thing I wanted to add was about the teachers' recovery. I know the SLT and a lot of schools are really conscious that they want to reduce the teachers' workload a bit, but please, if you're on SLT, try and involve the teachers in some of the script writing for the FAQs, because they do want to be involved. And if the teachers are going to have to give the answers to the FAQs, they need to believe them themselves and to have some input into it, and then they will be far more invested in those answers as well, and feel that they really belong to the whole school community.
Brilliant, thank you, Bryony. I'm conscious of time. I'm also conscious of Zoom fatigue for all of us, so I'm going to wrap it up. Basically, in the follow-up email, I'll make sure you've got links to the speakers so you can follow them. So Maria's doing some really interesting research and runs a pastoral grassroots organisation. Emma's written a book, has got another book coming out very soon. Flora is a brilliant head teacher to follow on Twitter. Read just how she talks about education, but when she has energy and time to blog, she's a brilliant blogger as well. And Amjad has got a website with free resources, so I will demark all 4 of them to you. We also shared with you in the introductory email a few weeks ago, I think, a guy called Ben on Twitter, I can't remember his handle, I'll put it in. He held a round table on transition, and they've basically all written a blog, and he's produced a PDF kind of like document, and it's got loads of different perspectives in a written format. So it could be an interesting document to share with the staff team. And finally, if you are from a primary school in Oxfordshire, is it Camaraderos? I don't know how to say it. Lucinda works with this company, and there's some opportunities for a wellbeing package for primary schools in Oxfordshire. So I'll also send that on to you to make sure it's on your radar. So I really appreciate you joining us today. Oh, thank you, Emma. Ben Brown, there's the link there, you start. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us from not only from Oxfordshire, from all over the UK, from Norway and from India. It's been brilliant to have so many people on the call. And I hope that was useful. Make the connections in the space. We'll follow up, and then hopefully those of you who can access a face-to-face meeting in the future, we'll see you very soon.